I'm in Lviv. This is the biggest city in western Ukraine, and behind me is the rather magnificent Opera House. Do you know they built that in just 3 years? That's quite impressive, around 1900. Now, at my feet there are the various jet heads of a fountain, but they're not operating right now because it's winter. But in the summer I would be getting very wet, and beneath these is a river that flowed along here. It's now part of the modern sewage system of the city. But in the late 18th century, this all got paved over, and that was when the city was really thriving. Lviv was at the crossroads of many trade routes, and this was a thriving mercantile city, and they were putting up all these big, magnificent Baroque buildings around me. It was a very multilingual city, it was a very multicultural city, and this is the story that you hear all around Europe all the time throughout the recent centuries. That you would have the developing cities with their populations of Jews, and here there were Armenians and Poles and various other people, all speaking their own languages and to some degree keeping their old cultures. And it was surrounded by what is sometimes referred to as the Ukrainian Sea. So these would be rustic, largely illiterate people speaking their own native language of Ukrainian, and not really playing a full part in the city's history. They were often banned, for instance, from studying at the local university. And not having your own written language that is being printed and widely disseminated, it makes you less powerful. And as the various controlling powers that came along did their thing, they would often want to use the same places. Again, this is a theme you get coming up in European history again and again. They want to use the same places that have symbolic power to show that they are now the ones in control. So this was just two separate streets once with a river running through it. But then when the Soviets came along, they wanted to unify this area and say, look, this is the main street through the center of town. Let's give it some glorious name. And so they named it 1st of May Street after the Russian Revolution. That didn't last very long because the Third Reich came along, and they thought Adolf Hitler Place. That sounds much better. So there was a ring-shaped sculpture here symbolizing Nazi unification. That was right where I'm standing. But then when the Soviets liberated the area again, that unsurprisingly got taken away, and this became Lenin Avenue. But today, this is Freedom Avenue, which perhaps describes the current feeling of the local occupants.
When they dismantled the Lenin monument, they found that its foundations were made out of local tombstones. On one side of this open area was this modern reconstruction of a bit of the medieval city wall. Here also you will find a huge bronze monument. Here you see many significant dates in the city's history, almost all marking some grim event. So many invasions, and many emaciated victims of the Holodomor, the great famine under Stalin. Here you see the grasping hand of a priest. 3 priests are pulling the country apart between them. The Russian Orthodox priest has his hand on Crimea.
This is a sculpture of Taras Shevchenko. And as you can see, he was very tall. He's cast in bronze, as is this enormous piece of sculpture behind me. It was actually cast in Argentina by Ukrainians, part of the Ukrainian diaspora living in Argentina today. It was designed here, but cast over there, and it is deeply symbolic. Now, it is said that there are more monuments to Shevchenko than there are to anyone else in the world. He is part of the Ukrainian national identity. He was a poet and a painter who started life in indentured servitude, but he was taken on by an academy and rose to become a great painter, and particularly a poet who championed poetry written specifically in Ukrainian. And for a long time there are a lot of people who in their homes would have a Bible and a copy of his works. And not only is he a champion of Ukrainian identity, but also of Ukrainian resistance to outside influence.
This 40-foot wave of symbolism has Our Lady, Mary, at the top, and various national heroes below. Shevchenko wasn't from this city, he is a national figure. And here's the mini version for blind people to feel and polish, complete with text in Braille. Next to this was a heart-shaped grill with named ribbons tied to it. The label here says something like, "Don't forget those who have died for their country and those who are held captive still." Banksy was here. The Azov Brigade has now grown to become a full corps and has distinguished itself in this conflict, but they say that many of its soldiers who have been captured are being maltreated. This is the St. Apostles Peter and Paul Garrison Church. Once a Jesuit church, after World War II, the Soviets decided that it was better used as a book depository. In 2011, it became a church once more and is now being restored. Today, this church is a Greek Catholic church, which, like English Anglicanism, is a compromise denomination bridging between Polish Catholicism and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Notice that it has both the altar of one and the icons of the other. Here you see a photograph of a military base that was completely destroyed, apart from one cross. This cross. In 2014, the anti-terrorist operation, that's what they call it here, they need a catchier term, started, and many people from Lviv answered the call. Each picture here is of one person from this city who died in that operation and is buried here. And I'm showing you only about half of them.
Starting from 2014 and from 2022.
In the Baroque town, the wealthy Catholic merchants built their nice houses, but if they built them more than 3 windows wide, like that one, they had to pay an extra tax, so it was one way to show off. The local military commander had a 5-window house. Oh, what a guy. The Rat House, the town hall. When this was first built, the locals scorned and resented it. Called it the building with the chimney, but now it is loved and a trumpeter sometimes plays from the tower.
I'm in an Armenian church. Now, there was a time in Lviv when the Armenians were the richest, most successful community in the entire city. But then war came, and after World War II, they saw which way the wind was blowing, and they didn't want to be in the Soviet Empire, so they decamped, and they left here, and they went to, this may surprise you, Poland, in order to avoid the Soviet Union. Now, in Britain we think of Poland as the other side of the Iron Curtain, and so that's all Soviet Union, right? But Poland was at least semi-independent of the Soviet Union, and this area of the world is close enough to the Polish border that the people here could watch Polish television and listen to Polish radio, and they saw a different world with more colour in it. People allowed children wearing colourful clothes, and look what was on their television. It was amazing. So for them, the Polish world was one of aspiration. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, people started coming back, Armenians started coming back to Lviv, and they have started to renovate this rather nice Armenian church.
The Armenian cross is not depicted with a bleeding corpse nailed to it. Instead, as you see on the corners of it here, it grows leaves and blooms with the joy of the resurrection. We in Britain are used to the post-Reformation Protestant look for churches, and sometimes forget that our medieval churches were once like this, painted in a riot of colour. It did not go unnoticed that a lot of the figures in this church's murals bore a striking resemblance to the team of painters depicting them. This even extended to the ginger Jesus here. It did not go down well. This clearly 20th century painting shows figures whose feet are on fire and unable to touch the ground, for they have beheaded John the Baptist, which was not on. Christmas nativity scene. We could be in Croydon. Here we see the funeral procession of a sainted bishop, which has been joined by the spirits of dead monks or friars, depicted in simple white lines. On the left here, St. George, who was not Turkish, patron saint of several places including England, and on the right, carrying the baby Jesus over a river, St. Christopher, patron saint of travellers everywhere, including the Armenians. Jolly Friar, he's jolly because he's drunk.
I'm standing outside a bar called the Kerosene lamp, and here you can see a very large kerosene lamp. But why is this significant? Well, Lviv, you may not know this, is in fact the birthplace of the kerosene lamp. And here we have a sculpture of Jan Zech, who was the developer of it. He first found a way to refine oil, which is abundantly available here in the natural geology of the region, and he was looking, so they say, for a way to turn this into alcohol, but disaster struck and he ended up with kerosene. But it was all right because he realized that there was a useful application of this, and so with his lucky nose and his rather unusually lucky toe, he developed the kerosene lamp. And within 1 year of this invention, a new thing started to happen: surgery at night.
I bet you I can get him to take a photograph of that steel sheeting.
Next to me here are two beautiful stained glass windows, or at least I assume that they're beautiful stained glass windows. I can't really tell how beautiful they are because they're behind chipboard, which even this far west in Ukraine today has been deemed necessary to protect them from possible blast.
Behind this steel sheeting is an 18th century wooden carving of the crucifixion, so I was told.
This cafe is called Armenia. It's a coffee house, and you may know that in the 18th century in Britain there were loads of coffee houses of London, and various people would write pamphlets about all sorts of controversial things. It was the coffee house was where you had a meeting and where you germinated ideas, possibly revolutionary ones. And coffee houses in Lviv played that role too. And before World War II there were loads of coffee houses here. But unfortunately in World War II that died out, and then the Soviet era came along and there was no coffee to be had. Amazingly, about 5 coffee houses somehow managed to survive. This one was set up in the 1970s, and dissidents here fermented the seeds of revolution. They were fighting against the Soviet Empire, and since 1990 every single revolution that has taken place in Ukraine has had some of its seeds sown here. Ideas in the coffee houses were passed around, and even if the actual mass protests happened somewhere else, perhaps in Kyiv, this place played a part. One major difference between the more recent protests, however, is that the earlier dissidents, the 1970s ones, a lot of those got sent to gulags.
I bumped into an American chap who lived in Russia from 1998 to 2002 and there watched the rise of Putin, and he wanted to say something. So I let him say it.
This is a country that is not part of the Russian Empire. This is distinctly different than Russia. This is a European country that desires rule of law. It desires democracy, and for each individual citizen to have a vote and to have its own voice. This is a multicultural, multi-ethnic nation that respects those differences, as opposed to Russia, where Russian ethnicity is dominant. This is a completely different country than Russia. And every time that Russia, and Moscow in particular, has had a moment of weakness, this country has tried to escape it and has always been subjugated once again when Russia rises and regains its power. It cannot happen again. Ukraine is European. Ukraine is independent. Ukraine has an identity that it is its own and a culture of its own. And if we allow this to happen, this subjugation to happen, it will not stop at Ukraine. It doesn't mean tanks on the Champs-Élysées. It means that there is a threat from Moscow that will impose its order on Europe. If Europeans and Westerners in general, including Americans, think that they can escape this by simply appeasing the madman and the madmen in the Kremlin and the idea of Russian imperial power, then it will not stop with Ukraine. It will not necessarily be a war. It will not necessarily be tanks, as I say, or Russian ships in Portsmouth. It will simply mean that Russia will have an undue dominance over Europe, and if the Europeans and the Westerners ignore this, they are sowing the seeds of their own demise. That's what I do.
Wow, okay, that's what he does. Fair enough, we'll leave it there.
I was taken to an achingly trendy bar stroke cafe art gallery place called Zyga, which was proud of its non-conformist past. Not sure if these cigarettes are an artwork or an advert. Oh no, it's a dead end! Fear not, there is a ladder! Up to... heaven?
Behind me we see some of the medieval fortifications of the old town. At the top it's a modern reconstruction, of course, but you can see the walkway along the top there, and then some brick arches, and I think there's some surviving original masonry down at the bottom. I'm in the Jewish quarter. Now, in the heyday of Lviv, about 30% of the population was Jewish. They weren't all concentrated in one tiny area. Instead, you could walk across the street and there would be some Jewish houses there. The population was mixed in a bit, but this was the Jewish hut here, and today it's a memorial. This gap here was where a synagogue was, and over there is another big gap where there was another. And unfortunately, well,
It's the same old story. The Nazis came here, there were over 40 synagogues.
and when they left there were only 2, and that's because those 2 they chose to use as stables. The rest were deliberately blown apart, and the population of Jews went from something like 130 to 150,000 down to 800.
Another grand Baroque church. I wonder how this one survived.
Behind me here, a colossal Baroque structure. This was built to the glory of God. But under the Soviets, you may be surprised to learn that the reason that this has survived so well is that they used it as the Museum of Atheism.
One local character was a tramp called Slavic, who got photographed wearing a great variety of outfits, and for some reason the high-end fashion brand Balenciaga, that I had never heard of, has been copying his various looks, sometimes very accurately. So, if you want to look like a Ukrainian tramp, buy Balenciaga.
Behind me is a rather nice building. It's a sort of hybrid of the Art Nouveau and Deco styles, and I've had a detail pointed out to me, which is that up there you can see some letters, and they are actually a number.
So that first Cyrillic letter that looks a bit like an A, that would normally mean 1. But can you see it has a sort of little tilted Z above it? That makes it 1000. Confusingly, there are a few different versions of this numbering system. But anyway, the next one, that single letter, stands for 900. Now there is no 0. Instead, we go straight onto the last one, looking a bit like an E, and that means 5. So 1905. 1905. Hey Santa, ho Santa, 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 hey.
Here we have the outside of the fortifications of the town. And outside the town is a good place to build one of these buildings or one of those buildings over there. Can you see it? It's got very thick walls, and it didn't have many windows once. I think they've added a few. It's an arsenal. That's where you keep your supply of gunpowder. You really don't want one of those things catching fire, and if it does catch fire, you don't want it to catch fire inside your town or be anywhere near it. And behind me here we have a statue of Ivan Fedorovich, and he was a pioneer of printing, and particularly of the languages in these parts. And he's become, if you like, the father of printing and the printed word and that entire world for the Soviet Union. And the Soviets wanted him buried in Russia, but they could never find his body. Apparently they wanted to do something similar with Potemkin. When they went to Kerosene, quite recently, they went into a cathedral and dug up his body. But then, so they say, they lost it. Behind me is a sculpture of this guy with that pig. You can't actually see the sculpture because it's been boarded off to protect it in case there's an air raid. But the text says you'll be able to see it again after victory.